Tantor Audio presents Paw Enforcement by Diane Kelly. Narrated by Coleen Marlo. 1. Job Insecurity. Fort Worth Police Officer Megan Lewis. My rusty-haired partner lay convulsing on the hot asphalt, his jaw clenching, and his body involuntarily curling into a jittery fetal position as two probes delivered 1,500 volts of electricity to his groin. The crotch of his police-issue trousers darkened as he lost control of his bladder. I'd never felt close to my partner in the 6 months we'd worked together. But at that particular moment, I sensed a strong bond. The connection likely stemmed from the fact that we were indeed connected then, by the 2 wires leading from the taser in my hand to my partner's twitching testicles. I didn't set out to become a hero. I decided on a career in law enforcement for 3 other reasons. 1. Having been a twirler in my high school's marching band, I knew how to handle a baton. 2. Other than barking short orders or rattling off Miranda Rights, working as a police officer wouldn't require me to talk much. 3. I had an excess of pent-up anger. Might as well put it to good use, right? Of course, I didn't plan to be a street cop forever. Just long enough to work my way up to detective. A lofty goal, but I knew I could do it, even if nobody else did. I'd enjoyed my studies in criminal justice at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas, especially the courses in criminal psychology. No, I'm not some sick, twisted creep who gets off on hearing about criminals who steal, rape, and murder. I just thought that if we could figure out why criminals do bad things, maybe we could stop them, you know? To supplement my student loans, I'd worked part-time at the gift shop in the nearby State Prison Museum, selling tourists such quality souvenirs as ceramic ashtrays made by the prisoners and decks of cards containing prison trivia. The unit had once been home to Clyde Barrow of Bonnie and Clyde fame, and was also the site of an 11-day siege in 1974, spearheaded by heroin kingpin Fred Gomez Carrasco, jailed for killing a police officer. Our top-selling item was a child's timeout chair fashioned after Old Sparky, the last remaining electric chair used in Texas. Talk about cruel and unusual punishment. To the corner, little Billy. No, Mommy, no! Anything but the chair! I'd looked forward to becoming a cop, keeping the streets safe for citizens, maintaining law and order, promoting civility and justice. Such noble ideals, right? What I hadn't counted on was that I'd be working with a force full of macho shitheads. With my uncanny luck, I'd been assigned to partner with the most macho, most shitheaded cop of all, Derek the Big Dick Mackey. As implied in the aforementioned reference to twitching testicles, our partnership had not ended well. That's why I was sitting here outside the chief's office on a cheap plastic chair, chewing my thumbnail down to a painful nub, waiting to find out whether I still had a job. Evidently, tasering your partner in the cojones is considered not only an overreaction, but also a blatant violation of department policy, one that carried the potential penalty of dismissal from the force, not to mention a criminal assault charge. So much for those noble ideals, huh? I ran a finger over my upper lip, blotting the nervous sweat that had formed there. Would I be booted off the force after only 6 months on duty? With the city's budget crisis, there had been threats of cutbacks and layoffs across the board. No department would be spared. If the chief had to fire anyone, he'd surely start with the rookie with the Irish temper. If the chief canned me, what would I do? My aspirations of becoming a detective would go down the toilet. Once again, I'd be Megan Lewis, a.k.a. the Loser. As you probably guessed, my pent-up anger had a lot to do with that nickname. I pulled my telescoping baton from my belt and flicked my wrist to extend it. Snap! Though my police baton had a different feel from the twirling baton I'd used in high school, I'd quickly learned that with a few minor adjustments to accommodate the distinctive weight distribution, I could perform many of the same tricks with it. I began to work the stick, performing a basic flat spin. The repetitive motion calmed me, helped me think. It was like a twirling metal stress ball. Swish, swish, swish. The chief's door opened, and 3 men exited. All wore navy tees emblazoned with white letters spelling Bomb Squad, stretched tight across well-developed pecs. Though the Bomb Squad was officially part of the Fort Worth Fire Department, the members worked closely with the police. Where there's a bomb, there's a crime, after all. Most likely these men were here to discuss safety procedures for the upcoming concerts in the garden. After what happened at the Boston Marathon, extra precautions were warranted for large public events. The guy in front, a blonde with a military-style haircut, cut his eyes my way. He watched me spin my baton for a moment, then dipped his head in acknowledgement when my gaze met his. He issued the standard Southern salutation. "Hey." His voice was deep with a subtle rumble, like far-off thunder warning of an oncoming storm. The guy wasn't tall, but he was broad-shouldered, muscular, and undeniably masculine. He had dark green eyes and a dimple in his chin that drew my eyes downward, over his soft, sexy mouth, and back up again. A hot flush exploded through me. I tried to nod back at him, but my muscles seemed to have atrophied. My hands stopped moving and clutched my baton in a death grip. All I could do was watch as he and the other men continued into the hall and out of sight. Blurg, acting like a frigid virgin. How humiliating. Once the embarrassment waned, I began to wonder. Had the Bomb Squad guy found me attractive? Was that why he greeted me? Or was he simply being friendly to a fellow public servant? My black locks were pulled back in a tight, tortuous bun, a style that enabled me to look professional on the force while allowing me to retain my feminine allure after hours. There were only so many sacrifices I was willing to make for employment, and my long, lustrous hair was not one of them. My freckles showed through my light makeup. Hard to feel like a tough cop if you're wearing too much foundation or more than one coat of mascara. Fortunately, I had enough natural coloring to get by with little in the way of cosmetics. I was a part Irish-American, part Mexican-American mutt, and just enough Cherokee blood to give me an instinctive urge to dance in the rain, but not enough to qualify me for any college scholarships. My figure was neither thin nor voluptuous, but my healthy diet and regular exercise kept me in decent shape. It was entirely possible that the guy had been checking me out, right? I mentally chastised myself. Chill, Megan. I hadn't had a date since I joined the force. But so what? I had more important things to deal with at the moment. I collapsed my baton, returned it to my belt, and took a deep breath to calm my nerves. The chief's secretary, a middle-aged brunette wearing a polyblend dress, sat at her desk typing a report into the computer. She had twice as much butt as chair, her thighs draping over the sides of the seat. But who could blame her? Judging from the photos on her desk, she'd squeezed out 3 children in rapid succession. Having grown up in a family of 5 kids, I knew mothers had little time to devote to themselves when their kids were young and constantly needed mommy to feed them, clean up their messes, and bandage their various boo-boos. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, and no nail polish. The chief deserved credit for not hiring a younger, prettier, better accessorized woman for the job. Obviously, she'd been hired for her mad office skills. She'd handled a half-dozen phone calls in the short time I've been waiting, and her fingers moved over the keyboard at such a speedy pace, it was a miracle her hands didn't burst into flame. Whatever she was being paid, it wasn't enough. The woman's phone buzzed again, and she punched her intercom button. Yes, sir. She paused a moment. I'll send her in. She hung up the phone and turned to me. The chief is ready for you. Thanks. I stood on wobbly legs. Will the chief take my badge today? Is my career in law enforcement over? I turned the knob and stepped into the doorway. A dozen eyes on me. 2 of the eyes belonged to Chief Garelick. The other 10 were lifeless glass spheres inserted into the various animal heads mounted on the wall, including a 16-point buck, a mountain lion, and an enormous gaping trout. Given the abundance of wood paneling and taxidermy, the room looked more like a hunting lodge than a government office. 2 long windows looked out onto downtown Fort Worth, the clock tower of the Tarrant County Courthouse visible a block away. Situated between the windows was a bookcase boasting framed snapshots of the chief in camouflage coveralls crouched next to a fresh, bloody kill. In another, the chief held a dead duck by the neck, while the big dick stood next to him, his red burr cut flaming in the sunshine, his arm draped over the chief's shoulders. No doubt about it, the chief was a man's man. I'd met Chief Garlick only once before, at the induction ceremony for the officers in my training class. After administering the police officer's oath, he'd made his way down the line, shaking hands, pinning badges on uniforms, giving each new officer a stiff salute. Today, he sat in an oversized leather chair behind an enormous oak desk, a collection of hunting rifles mounted in a rack behind him. The chief was broad and bulky, with a complexion best described as spam-like, red and ruddy, with visible lines of broken capillaries on his cheeks and around his nose. High blood pressure would be my guess. Serving as police chief in a city of 750,000 people wasn't exactly a low-stress job. He ran a hand through his silver hair and locked his steely eyes on me, shooting me the same look one would give an aluminum siding salesman who'd appeared uninvited on the doorstep.
"Get your ass in here, Officer Luz."
Not exactly a polite invitation, but I was in no position to take offense. I stepped into his office, closing the door gently behind me. The latch caught with a resounding click, as if sealing my fate. He gestured to one of the wing chairs covered in genuine fake leather, courtesy of the city's taxpayers. The stretched-out fabric on the seat evidenced decades of butts having perched on the chair. My ass was obviously not the first that would be chewed out here. Before I could even settle in, he snapped,
"Good God almighty, Luz! What the hell were you thinking?"
No working up to the subject, no pussyfooting around. Then again, the chief was a busy man with no time for niceties. "I guess I wasn't thinking, sir," I said, disappointed to hear the stutter in my voice. I was a cop, damn it. I needed to sound professional, tough, competent. Instead, my voice sounded feeble and fumbling, the way it had back in school when a teacher called on me in class. No, I'm not going to let myself down. I can do this. I'm sorry. I lost my temper. Carefully choosing my words and using as few as possible, I explained to the chief that Mackie and I had arrested a woman for driving under the influence. We found a bag of what appeared to be crystal meth in her car. I'd cuffed the woman, turned her to face the cruiser, and patted her down. Mackie had suggested I perform a body cavity search, further proposing I lick my finger first, not only to make insertion easier, but also to make things more fun for the woman. The perverse comment had been bad enough, but when he offered to lick my finger clean afterward, it was the last straw. I had put up with his disgusting sexist bullshit all day, including him positioning his erect baton between his legs and rubbing it up and down while making moaning sounds. Grrr. An uncontrollable rage had seized me. An instant later, Derek lay twitching on the asphalt, his hands cupped over his crotch, his eyes rolling back in his head, and drool oozing from his mouth. Then came the urination, as disclosed earlier. Repeating the exchange was embarrassing, but I had to tell the chief the filthy things Mackie had said. I had to defend myself. When I finished, the chief shook his head.
"Mackie's a prick. You'll get no argument here."
I wasn't sure whether to be offended by the chief's vulgar language, or to be glad he was treating me like one of the guys. I didn't want him to treat me differently because I was female. I wanted the same respect, or disrespect, he gave the male officers. The chief sat back in his chair and exhaled loudly.
"Ironically, the fact that Mackie's a prick is what makes him valuable to this department."
Mackie not only had a reputation for being a sexist pig, but he was also known for his extreme, bordering on insane bravery. He'd recently rescued a woman dragged into her apartment by an abusive boyfriend who'd already taken several shots at officers with a sawed-off shotgun. While the other cops shielded themselves behind their cruisers and waited for the SWAT team to arrive, Mackie had snuck up the side staircase, kicked in the door, and stormed the place. Of course, Mackie claimed afterward that he'd never have risked his life if the woman didn't have such a ginormous rack and smoking hot ass. The chief put his feet up on his desk and his hands behind his head. A good sign. He'd be in a more formal posture if he was going to fire me, right? His chair squeaked as he rocked back.
"You shouldn't have tasered Mackie, especially in the balls."
He cringed involuntarily, as if the mere thought caused him pain.
But he had it coming.
Frankly, when considering what the big dick deserved, electrified gonads was a drop in the bucket. Chief Garlick wagged a hairy-knuckled finger at me.
You're lucky Mackie brought this to me rather than internal affairs. I'm going to keep this incident off your record and let you slide, this time.
Thank God.
But only this time, he added. You'll be booted off the force and face criminal prosecution if you pull a stupid stunt like that again. You hear me?
I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump that had formed in my throat the instant the word stupid registered with my ears. I was not stupid. Impatient, sure. Short-tempered, hell yeah. Maybe even impulsive. But not stupid. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth threatened to crack. Understood, sir. The chief retrieved a paper pouch of chewing tobacco from his breast pocket, pinched a bit from the package, and slid it into his mouth between his cheek and gum. He returned the pouch to his pocket and picked up a Diet Coke can, putting it to his lips and expelling tobacco juice into it. Pating! I tried not to show my revulsion.
I'm assigning you a new partner.
The chief's eyes gave off a wicked gleam, like the glint from a freshly polished revolver.
She's a real bitch. You two will get along great.
I ignored the implication that I, too, was a bitch. Unlike stupid, though, being called a bitch didn't really bother me. A female officer? Teaming with a woman could be fun. Mackie had kept the cruiser's radio tuned to a sports channel all day. With a female partner, we could listen to NPR or a book on tape, maybe a good detective novel. A female partner would smell better, too. Mackie was a big guy, producing sweat by the gallon in the Texas heat. By the end of each shift, our cruiser became a BO gas chamber. Of course, the jerk never seemed to be bothered by his own stench. The chief retrieved his handheld radio from his desktop and squeezed the talk button.
Send in Sergeant Brigit.
So, my new partner was a sergeant, exceeding me in rank. Typical, as rookies like me were generally paired with a more experienced officer. But Brigit? It sounded more like a first name than a last name. A jangle sounded outside the door, likely Sergeant Brigit's keys or handcuffs. The door opened, and she walked in. Whoa. The chief hadn't been lying. My new partner was a real bitch. As in 4 paws and 8 tits. Huge, too, with thick fur and black and tan. The jangling came from her tags, a city license and a rabies tag, hanging from a studded black leather collar that made the bitch look butch. A cry of "No!" spurted involuntarily from me. Remembering my manners and the fact that I was in the chief's office, I turned back to him. No, sir. I can't partner with the dog. The chief cocked his head.
You allergic?
No, sir.
Then she's yours. You'll be responsible for caring for her after hours, too.
No way. I didn't want that kind of responsibility. Don't get me wrong, it's not that I had anything against dogs. Problem was, as I was the oldest of 5 children, any jobs my parents couldn't handle had been outsourced, or should I say downsourced, to me. I'd been responsible for dressing, feeding, and generally riding herd over my brothers and sisters. The only thing my parents had never asked me to do was tutor my siblings. Things had been no better when I went off to college. I'd gone potluck for roommates in the dorm, and the computer had paired me with one irresponsible roommate after another. Girls who partied every night, forgot to set their alarms, left their dirty panties and socks all over the floor. They counted on me to wake them for class, to maintain a stock of tampons and rolls of quarters for laundry. When I'd moved back to Fort Worth after college graduation last May, I'd immediately signed up for the Fall Police Academy and rented a tiny apartment in an older complex in East Fort Worth. It wasn't much. 300 square feet and worn blue industrial carpet and a tiny rectangle of rippled linoleum in the kitchen nook. But as management loved to remind disgruntled tenants, the place came with free cable television. Most important, though, I'd been finally free of responsibility for anyone but myself. I didn't even own a houseplant. Someday I'd want a husband, kids, maybe even a cat or dog. But not yet. Not now. The handler holding the dog's leash ordered the animal to sit. The dog obeyed, turning her big brown eyes on me in what could only be described as a death glare. She seemed no more excited about being partnered with me than I was about being partnered with her. It was almost as if she'd understood what I'd said, that I didn't want the responsibility of taking care of her. But a dog wouldn't be smart enough to understand that, would it? I tried to think of another viable excuse. I glanced over at the dog. The beast had to weigh close to 100 pounds. I turned back to the chief. "I drive a smart car, sir. She won't fit inside." He waved his hand dismissively. "Sure she will." He still wasn't biting. "My apartment management doesn't allow pets. They're forbidden by my lease." "Good thinking, Megan. He's head of the city's law enforcement. He can't argue with the law."
"We called the property manager," the chief shot back. "He said he'd make an exception for a police dog. Figured it might reduce crime at the complex."
The place had suffered a rash of vehicle burglaries lately. Nonetheless, Chief Garrett cut me off with a raised palm.
"No more excuses, Officer Luz."
The chief spit another gooey blob of tobacco into his soda can.
"You messed up good, and I've got to make some cutbacks. You either partner with Sergeant Fluffybutt, or you're off the force."
2. A big whiff of rookie. Fort Worth Police Sergeant Brigit. Megan had no way of knowing, of course, but Brigit didn't set out to be a hero either. She became a canine officer for 3 other reasons. 1. Her original owner was too irresponsible to take proper care of her. The dipshit left her in the backyard for days on end in freezing weather, while he and his equally dipshitted friends went on a bender of Jack Daniels and Northern Lights, a species of cannabis that he cultivated himself under grow lights in the garage. 2. The frostbitten dog was forced to dig under the chain-link fence, working until her paws bled, to go in search of water before she died of dehydration. She mustered up one final tiny turd. Her aforementioned dipshit owner had forgotten to feed her too, and left it on the back step as a parting gift before taking off. 3. Animal Control picked her up 5 blocks over after an elderly woman reported a bear licking the frozen water in her bird bath. The officer freed the dog's frozen tongue from the ice, gave her some water from the bottle in his truck, and brought her to the city shelter. Brigit didn't stand a chance of being adopted by a family in search of a pet. She was an adult dog by then, no longer one of those adorable puppies who drew an ooh or an ah or an ain't you the cutest thing. A shepherd mix, she weighed in at a whopping 97 pounds. Not much of a market for a dog that size. To make matters worse, her fur was long and thick, sure to shed all over the place and require regular brushing. Few people would take on such a high-maintenance pet. The dog was doomed. She wagged her tail vigorously when families came in looking for a pet to adopt, showed them how well-behaved she was, that she could sit, shake, even play dead. Occasionally someone would remark about how beautiful her coat was, or how smart she seemed. But nobody wanted to take home a beast that would cost a fortune to feed. Brigit watched carefully through the steel mesh of her enclosure, and quickly caught on how things worked at the shelter. Volunteers would occasionally come to take the dogs for a walk outside. Those dogs would come back happy. But dogs didn't return to their cages if they went with a man wearing a dingy lab coat. The man smelled of mint gum and cheap aftershave. But most of all, he smelled of death. He smelled sad, too, as if he didn't like having to do what he did, as if he wished people would stop letting their pets reproduce willy-nilly so that his services would no longer be needed. Brigit spent her nights clawing desperately and futilely at the concrete floor, trying to dig a hole and escape. One day, the same animal control officer who'd picked her up off the street bent down to look at Brigit through the steel mesh. "Sorry, girl," he'd whispered, his eyes cloudy, his soft voice cracking. "I'm really, really sorry." Brigit could smell the man in the lab coat coming down the hall, could smell the mint gum, the cheap aftershave, the death. He was coming for her. She panicked, spinning in her cage. "Woof!" she cried. "Woof, woof, woof!" Before the man in the lab coat could reach her, up walked another man in a dark blue uniform.
I need a dog, he told the animal control officer, still kneeling in front of Brigit's cage. A smart dog. One with lots of energy that can be trained to serve as a canine officer.
Brigit didn't hesitate. Me! Take me! She jumped on the door of her cage, her long tail slapping the sides of the small enclosure as it whipped desperately back and forth. Please!
Got just the dog for you, the animal control officer said. Right here. He pointed into Brigit's cage, and the man in the blue uniform bent down to take a look.
Brigit stopped barking and sat. She held out her paw to shake. She fell to the floor, rolled onto her back with all 4 paws in the air, playing dead. If there was an Academy Award for animal performers, she would have won, paws down. She showed the man in the blue uniform every trick in the book, then turned her big brown eyes on him and gently licked his hand through a hole in the chain-link mesh. The man showed his teeth, a bad sign on dogs, but, as Brigit had observed, a good sign on humans.
I'll take her.
Thus, Brigit became an officer in the Fort Worth Police Department, her salary paid in dog biscuits and belly rubs. The cop who'd picked Brigit out of the shelter had taken good care of her, and she'd enjoyed working with him for the 2 years they'd been together. But he'd recently resigned from the police force to work for a private security firm. Half the risk for twice the pay. Who could blame him? He told Brigit he'd miss her, given her a big pat on the head and a chuck on the chin when he turned her over to the chief. He couldn't keep Brigit. She wasn't his pet. Canine officers were considered tools, pieces of equipment, no different from a gun or a baton or a taser. Brigit belonged to the Fort Worth Police Department. So, here she was, being reassigned to a new partner, Officer Megan Lewis. Brigit could tell Megan didn't like the idea of being partnered with her. When Brigit walked through the door of the chief's office, Officer Lewis hadn't shown her teeth. She'd also emitted short, loud sounds. Brigit knew those short, loud sounds meant Megan wasn't happy. Well, Brigit wasn't too crazy about being partnered with Megan either. Officer Lewis smelled like a rookie. Too fresh, too clean. Her uniform lacked the stench of terror-induced sweat that no detergent could ever quite wash out. Luz hadn't seen real danger yet, that was certain. It would take some training to get her up to speed. Fortunately, Brigit was up to the task. 3. Lessons to be learned. The Rattler. He never set out to be a killer, exactly. Like a rattlesnake lying coiled up in the grass, shaking its tail. He, too, simply wanted to issue a warning, to shake things up, to force people to change course. A bomb seemed the best approach to achieving his aims for several reasons. 1. Bombs are easy to make. Hell, you could find detailed instructions on the internet. 2. Materials needed to make a bomb were cheap and readily available. 3. A bomb would not only get attention, but also destroy evidence. He could execute his plan with little risk of being identified. On the other hand, the low risk of capture almost took the fun out of it. 4. My new roomie. Megan. The handler who'd brought Brigit to the chief's office gave me a brief training session, just enough to hold me over until I could begin the full canine course next week. He showed me how to make the dog sit, stay, heel, and lie down, as well as how to order her into her cage. The dog followed each of my orders perfectly. I still didn't like the situation, but I had to give her that.
Got it?
The handler asked, tentatively holding out the leash. I just as reluctantly took the leash from him, fighting the urge to sigh. Got it. Our tutoring now complete, the handler left. After a little more ass-chewing, Chief Garlick dismissed us, too. I fumed as I walked down the hall, the dog's nails giving off the click-click-click as we went. The chief had not only saddled me with a partner who was sure to be a pain in the ass, but also ordered me to take a 6-week anger management course. At least the class was offered online. If I had to sit in a classroom with some overly cheery teacher telling me to turn my frown upside down, I'd have to punch somebody. As I stepped out of the headquarters building, The afternoon June heat enveloped me like an unwelcome hug from a creepy uncle.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?